let's talk a little bit about how this is going to work. So I have, in this particular file, I have just the gradients and masks, and then I have another file for curves. There's not too much within curves, but I wanted to kind of split it up because we ran into some smaller issues with the file size being so big. Now, that being said, if you guys do have it, there is a link to my Google Drive page. If you go to that link in the Google Drive page, it'll take you to all the files, including this one and the curves file. Excuse me. The curves files as well. So if you'd like to follow along, you can go to the drive.google.com. I could put a link in the description if I could just remember to do that. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to do that real quick. Drive.google. Sorry about that. Should have had that beforehand. That will allow you to pull these files up right here and click here and copy link. Anybody with the link can go to this file, and you're able to pull up the gradient, this working class file, the curves file, and then all of the other free files that I have on there. Feel free to take a look at any of those. Is anyone recording this? That's a fantastic question. I'm pretty sure Zulu is, but I just want to make sure. I think he's got it. Yes, he is. Because he is the man. All right. So we usually, I should have asked. Thank you for asking, Funk. That's amazing. I would have forgotten. Okay, so free files on the Google Drive. If you guys are interested, there's all kinds of crazy stuff. You can see Mind1 has already got all kinds of crazy, wonderful stuff on his stream that he pulled from that file. And it's just a bunch of resources, a lot of just toys for you to play with. Go play with them, break them, show me what needs to be fixed. I am begging you, please take those files and just destroy trash and just fiddle with your heart's content. That will help me to understand what kinds of things need to be better. And it will also allow me to get my stuff out there further. The further reach I have, the bigger the community grows, the more of these kinds of things I can do. So just a heads up. So without further ado, all that stuff is out of the way. This is about gradients. We're going to start with gradients. We're going to work over to the masks. I'm just going to make this a little bit larger for you guys to get a better idea as to how this looks. This is just a file within Wire. Most of the time we start off with just like some basics and then we work up. So if you've heard these things before, a lot of this could be just general knowledge and you're kind of like, okay, I get this, Jake, whatever. But I always want to make sure to start from the basics so you guys understand this. And then some people will see these things and go, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. So I'm going to start here. So the gradients are basically what you see is what you get, right? You have a black. We are basically using a gradient from black to white, and it's going the vertical, right? You can, or horizontal. You can go vertical, you can go radial, you can go angular. But in the base case, what we're doing is we're going from one color and transitioning into another color. And that is the purpose of the gradients, is to give a spice to what it is that you do. That's the basic general just idea of what gradients are, okay? But the reason why it's important is because it's not just for making pretty colors. It can be used for masks, and later on I'll explain a little bit more about that. But it really is a powerful tool to do all kinds of crazy things, and I'm hoping to show you some of that today. I wanted to kind of give you an idea that basically gradients are, in its basic form, just a 1 and a 0. The 1 and 0 here in this linear node is the 0 is black and the 1 is white. And when you go from texture to data, you'll notice nothing changes on the screen, and the reason why is because they're both gradients. So if I change this to radial and I hit this button, now you'll notice that it basically went right back to what it was before. To give you an idea, there's no magic up this sleeve and there's no magic up this sleeve. They're all the same. So same kind of thing, an example of that as well. Color gradient from linear, excuse me, you get, excuse me, you get the black and the white, and you can change those colors, of course. And when you change those colors, you'll get the gradients between those two colors, right? Nothing really magical there. Just to kind of give you an example as to how that works. You can also get colors and gradients within Wire. This is something that I think is important. It's something they've just currently added within the last, I think it's been a year to 6 months. Somewhere in there, just recently, they started adding this in. I'm going to go to you have the color option as you had before, but the thing that's new now that I don't remember seeing before is this ability to create gradients from just the color node. And how I did this is I gave it 10 instances, and I basically changed this value here to random. At the very top right-hand corner, when you click on this button, it'll randomly generate any colors that you so choose. And so the reason why this is powerful is because this is a quick and dirty gradient. You can do this quickly. It's there. You just basically tell it how many inputs you want. I want 25 inputs, and now I have 5 random colors. Now you'll notice it didn't generate different colors. You'll see there's the same colors are being repeated, and the reason being is because even though it says there's 25 instances, I still need to hit my random button again to randomly generate 25 colors. They've done a fantastic job with the new kind of random features, and they've done a really great job, in my opinion, about changing the way in which certain functions work, so that they work a little bit more. They work a little bit more user intuitive with the system. Before, there was another gradient option. I can't even remember what the name of the gradient option was. It's been what do they call that? Depreciated. But now they've done a bang up job kind of fixing that around. You'll also notice that I have this, it says texture from data, and the reason being is because that's what changes it into like basically this gradient texture, right? Because it's from the data. The data that is being here, if I highlight over this, you'll notice when I highlight over the node, you'll see it says 0, 12, and 24. But if I hit the little drop down box, it'll show me all the colors and all of their color values. This is what's called a float 4, right? So then you have your R, your G, your B, and your alpha, and those are your 4 colors. So, or your 4 options for a float 4. Float 4s are generally used for, in this particular case, are used for RGB colors, red, green, and blue, and alpha. Okay, so that's where this comes into play. This one is the random triggers and steps. Let's talk about this a little bit. So what I've done here is I've actually taken this color node, and I've added some inputs. And the reason why is because I want my users to be able to see those trigger inputs. So, like in mine's case, he has all these fiddles of these sliders, and he has all the triggers, and he has all these buttons. These are the buttons that he sees. Well, sort of. These are the buttons that he sees on his end. But on my end, I actually have the ability to add triggers or add in sliders to adjust these for the user, so they can adjust them themselves, right? So for instance, here I have this random input. This is a float 4 random input. If you look over here on the right hand side, I'm sorry, my logo's in the way. I can move that. I can just double left click and like this. Okay, if you notice, if I drag this out, you should be able to see now. You'll see that it says float 4, and basically that's telling us that it's a random float 4 of 25 instances, so 25 different colors. And when I trigger that random button, I'll get 25 new random colors multiple times. And I can also set this to a metronome and set it to a beat, right? So if I wanted to do something really cool, this is how that's added in. I can just basically put in a metronome, and I can have that as my trigger. So now it's going to randomly generate. You'll also notice that it changed my instances to 1. That's just something that happens. You just change it back to 25. And then what you do is you change your generate to random. And then you also change your seed to random as well, so that they're not all the same values. If they're the same values, you get random colors, but they'll be relatively close within each other if the seed is close, or if they're the same seed number, right? So you could have them all one, all the way to the end, and just have that last one has a different seed number, and so that will be the only one that's a different color. So just a heads up, that's how that works. Excuse me. So the reason why this is important is because, as you can see, we're getting a texture from data. And in this particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in what's called a step. A step basically takes this gradient value that you see here between the colors, and it changes that step. The reason why you're changing your step is because you want those values to be closer or shorter from each other. So, like, I can make this all the way to let me rephrase that. The step basically, when you have a fuzzy value, let's go back up here real quick. I'm going to take this, and this, and I'm just going to hold Alt, and I'm going to make an extra copy of it. And the reason being is because I want to use it up here. Let's use it here. We're going to go back to the gradient just real quick, and I'm going to drag this into the step. The step, what it does is it creates this. It takes this value, and what happens is when I select on it, it's the fuzzy values in between, right? So it will shrink and shrink and expand based on the gray values in between. And what you're doing here is this is basically kind of like a threshold is the best way to look at it. I don't know if you guys really understand how threshold works, but basically the idea is that your gradient here it's basically saying I only want the values that are within a specific place. It makes a harsh line between the black and the white. It brings those two values close together, and it says anything that is negative of this number, make it black. Anything that is positive of this number, make it white. And so what happens is you get this kind of effect. Right? And this is going to be important later, again, because of masking. This will help with a little bit of how masking works. But as you can see, this works for just black and white here in this particular case, but over here, we're actually using it to control the colors, right? So it's just a different way of adjusting your color values. I thought this would be kind of important because this is a way that you can it transitions into some of the other things that are going on. But this is just to give you an example of other things that you can do with your gradients to kind of give them a different, unique look. Now let's talk a little bit about the examples. I'm going to bring in some examples here. We're going to go to this here. This is nothing more than a gradient like we saw before. And what I've done is I've taken that gradient and I'm using the colorize. Colorize is one of my favorite nodes. And the reason being is because I can take that gradient that is being created from here, and what I'm doing is that I'm able to choose the values in between here or change those values. And the reason why is because I've created this other linear and I've expanded that and I've added a texture from data. So this is what that looks like, okay? What I've done is I've taken my gradient and I've expanded it. And when you expand it, you have this option for ping pong. So I told it I want 20 values. And then I take those 20 values and I expand it to 80 values and then set it to ping pong. Ping pong means instead of going from black to white to black to white to black to white, it takes black and white and then inverts the next one. And so then it goes from white to black and then black to white. Okay. So now you have this ramp that goes through the values. But if I were to do repeat, you can see it does exactly what we were just talking about. It goes black, white, black, white, black, white, black, white. And this gives us a different look. Okay. But if I change my expand and I turn on ping pong, you'll notice I get this value instead. This is an entirely different look. It takes that value and makes peaks and valleys. Okay, so I was very interested in this idea, and I wanted to kind of give you an example as to why you would want to use those colors and make that flow in. You could really do some wild stuff with that, right? And you could hit the trigger button and change the colors. But let's say you didn't want the step in between. That's okay. We just take from this texture from node data. I'm going to bring it down to this false value, and you'll notice this is what we get now. We still get those different colors from that gradient, but you'll notice that there's no harsh lines in between, and it's because our step value has not been added or applied. So I'm basically creating this colorize over the top of the switch. So to kind of give you an idea as to how this all could work, let's go to this one. Here's another colorize. This is the same thing that we were just looking at. The only difference is instead of, I've added in a saw oscillator. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how a saw oscillator works. So first things first, showing you there's no magic up this sleeve and there's no magic up this sleeve. It's just straight how the patch works, right? So we have this gradient, it's going to a colorize, and when it goes to that colorize, it's using this texture from data to drive that value. How do I get that value to drive? What I've done is I've actually taken a linear, I've shifted that linear with a saw oscillator. The saw oscillator is going from 0 to 80, and then it's skipping back to 0, and then it goes all the way through 80 again. And I should be am I using it unipolar? I don't believe I am in this particular case. Unipolar does something different than without the unipolar. Unipolar will go 0 to 80 and then go back to 0. If you do without the unipolar, it will go from negative 80, I believe, to positive 80, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So you'll see this value right here in this saw oscillator is going from negative 80 to positive 80. And that's how I'm able to shift the colors. So let me explain a little bit about this because I think this is important. I'm using a linear. I'm expanding that linear of 20. So that's what this value looks like right here. And I'm taking all of those 20 values and then I'm expanding it to 80. So what's happening is when I expand it to 80 is I'm basically telling it to go from black to white in 20 different values. Okay. And then I've got basically that makes 4 segments, 20 plus 40, yes, 4 segments of black and white, right? So it's a gradient from black to white, and then there's 4 of them together. And I can show that if I were to hit expand right here. You'll notice when I click on this, here are all my values. You'll notice that they go from black to white to black to white. But you'll notice the order is a little bit different, and you'll notice, like right here, it's not going from black to white and then straight back to black. It's because ping pong is on. If I turn my repeat off, you'll notice, or if I turn repeat on, now I get from black to white, back to black, back to white, right? Or the gradations of white. So to, again, go back to ping pong, and you get that repeating, oscillating kind of feel, okay? And then I'm using a shift node. The shift node is nothing more than, if I take this off, I'm basically shifting those values left or right. That's what this one does. Saw versus triangle waves, exactly. So now when I put that in, you get that value. I'm using, the reason why we can see this is because of the texture from data. I also have this option here, expand shuffle. I'm going to show this in just 1 second. But when this is created, that colorize, the colorize is set to palette. This is also important when you're running your patches. I'm going to pull this off just real quick. This button here is set to patch it, or to palette. And the reason why you set it to palette is because we're basically taking this gradient and we're running through the palette of these values, right? A better way to show this is if I were to take this gradient and I were to change this to vertical, okay, now when I do it, this is the value that you receive. And the reason why is because it's basically changing each of the gradient values of black to white through this original linear gradient. So I'm basically oscillating a gradient on a gradient, and that's how you're able to get those waves of those bands of black and white, right? And so it really helps to kind of make some craziness. So I'm going to go back to radial just to show off this other example. I hit this button and I get something entirely different. Okay. So now how this works is I'm actually using a shuffle button. This is how gradient babies are made. Okay, so this is how basically how this works is I've done the same kinds of things. I have I have a linear gradient here, and I'm expanding it to 80. It's still on repeat. That doesn't technically matter too much, and the reason being is because I'm taking that expand of 80 that expand of 80 what do they call that, items, I guess you could say, or that bag of stuff, right? Those 80 different colors, okay? And I'm telling it to shuffle through, and when I tell it to shuffle through, it's going to shuffle all those colors so that they're not all lined up in a gradient. Now they're just being used as random colors to be thrown in. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, okay, that's great. That actually looks pretty fantastic, Jake. But what if I wanted to take those colors from before? You know, those colors? Well, okay, we could do that. I could take this color here, and I can drag it down to this expand here. And so now I should have... Did I already break it? I probably already broke it. Let me see, what did I do wrong? Oh, because I'm pulling from texture from data. See? Okay, so I'm going to delete that, and then we're going to take from here. Yeah, take from here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that, and we're going to drag it down to our expand. And now I should be able to drag this. So there, now I have this running through, and now if I click on colorize, now I have this going on. And if I hit that reshuffle, I can reshuffle the colors at the same time while I'm doing that. So not only am I doing random colors, I'm also now reshuffling those random colors that are being chosen, right? So then I could take this metronome and I could click this, I could drag this metronome onto the shuffle. Sorry about that. You're probably not being able to see what I'm doing here. Okay, so this node line here is from my color random at the top. And then this node here is to the metronome that's shuffling, the reshuffling the colors that are being added. So the colors are being added in here randomly, and then on the other side here are those same colors being added in with an expansion. When I expand it, I'm basically taking those values that I've already given it to these 25 colors and increasing that by basically doubling the amount. Okay, and then what happens is then when I've doubled that amount, I'm reshuffling or shuffling those colors around so they're not in any particular order. It just randomly shuffles them. And then I have a saw oscillator that's going 80 through 80 different images, right? Now, here's something to think about. If I have 25 colors up here, I'm probably going to want to make sure that this is like, instead of 80, I'm probably going to want to do 50, because then I'm doing two sets of color, right? You usually want to try your hardest to make your expand like an increment of those numbers. So if you're using 25, you're going to want to use 50 if you want two expands together. You're going to want to use 100 if you want four expands together, and you're going to use 75 in the expand if you want to make three values, right? And so then what that does is it randomly shuffles through those colors, but you'll notice that every now and then it looks like it's stuttering, right? It looks like it's doing something weird. And the reason being is because my amplitude, that saw oscillator is not going through all the colors, it's only going through 80, or it's going through to 50, and then it's going from 50 to another 30, and then going all the way back to the end. So it's repeating or stuttering, and the reason why is because it's not making a full circle. So what it needs to do is actually change this to 50, and that will make it so that it feels a little bit more like it's supposed to. So it's not so stuttery. It also could be because it's shuffling the colors, and the colors don't start the same. So the way to kind of fix that is you could take your expand, and I could put that in the shuffle, and then take my expand, my shuffle, and bring that into the expand. And the reason why I would do that is because now my colors are repeating twice, and then what I could do is I can change them to ping pong, and then they shouldn't stutter as much as long as I take off my shuffle. But that's just to kind of give you an idea as to how that works. Okay, it's just there's all kinds of craziness that you can do there. I'm going to give an example of usage of why this might be interesting, or kind of give you an advanced kind of look as to why gradients could be helpful. In this particular case, I've created this kind of monstrosity. This is nothing more than a fractal noise that's been a ripple applied to it with a saw oscillator so that it just goes on forever and ever and ever, or at least looks like it's going on forever and ever and ever. Okay? And then I'm colorizing it with a gradient. And that's basically how that's created. There's a few things here, a few nodes that I just want to talk over briefly. This new node here, this accumulate is a great node. What it basically does is it counts infinitely. That's the best way I can put it. It counts forever. And someone said to the guys, I was watching their video on YouTube, Hout, I think is how you say his name, or Hot. An amazing man. I think it's Marcus on the Slack channel for Resolume. He does a fantastic job with the Resolume tutorials. Shout out to him. He just gave one where he was talking about this a couple months back, and he was talking about, well, what if that accumulate goes forever and it starts stuttering on my wire because, wire loses the ability to count that high? And he said, well, that's almost impossible. And the reason why is because computers. But if it did run for something like 1,000 and a million days to the power of 7 or some kind of crazy nonsense, yeah, it might crash then. But if you're running for that kind of length, yeah, that's a concern. Yep. So so basically the float I have here is running incrementally. I'm basically just giving it the smallest amount of run on the as a festival VJ. Let's see if we can break it by just letting it run indefinitely and see how long it'll run. That sounds like something a VJ would do. So anyways, so in any case, this little this little float will run. It basically tells it how fast I want it to run, the increments, right? So it's incrementally numbering up by this value. Okay, so if I add another 0, it'll go slower. Actually, I probably have to add more than 1 0. But you get the point. The point is that it will. I can make it go slower if I hit divide. If I divide this, okay, and then I put this in here, and basically then I tell it 5. Now it should be running slower. It doesn't look like it's running slower, but it's running slower here. Okay, let me take this out and remove these zeros. Actually, I could probably just undo. Let's do that. Okay, so here's where it was before. You'll notice now it's starting to move. Okay, because the saw oscillator is doing the ripple, and that's the reason why I couldn't see it. So there's a slight ripple. The ripple is the thing that you're seeing the most, but the fractal noise is barely even changing. Would really like any links to the people you refer to, please, for tutorials if possible later. Absolutely. Resolume has their own YouTube channel, and it is amazing for YouTube information. I would strongly suggest looking over their YouTube channel, and I will put a link in the description at the end. Also, I've been watching a guy called Acerola is his name, Acerola. Acerola talks not necessarily about wire per se, but I suggest him to a lot of different people because he's got a lot of great information about the ins and outs of how computer graphics stuff works. It's a great way to understand like the other little inner workings. Okay, so what I've done here is I've actually taken this fractal and I've added this ripple, and I've basically colorized that ripple through this here. Okay. And so basically I have two linear gradients. Here's one and here's two, right? Here's all the values. There are 128 values. And so this is important. This is a good place to stop here just real quick. I didn't really explain this in the very beginning. When you're making a gradient, you have 255 colors. This comes up an awful lot within Photoshop and a lot of other programs. It actually is 256, and the reason why is because you have 0 and 200 to 255. So there's always that last 0 is a value within that list, right? So 0 is black and 255 is white. So basically, you have 255 values of gray all the way to the end, right? And so that's how that works. And basically, what we're doing to make colors within programs is different values of red, green, and blue at 255 values. So you're going from red to black, blue to black, green to black in 255. So 0 would be black, of course, and then 255 would be the red, green, or blue, right? And so as you see those sliders within Photoshop or within other programs, if I click on here, you'll notice at the top I have these red, green, and blue sliders. They don't necessarily look like typically what you see. If I slide them like this is what you usually see, right? In Resolume, they have a tendency to really kind of update the colors. They really want you to see what it's going to reflect, right? So if I add red and then if I'm going to add this yellow, these are the colors that I'm going to see if I add that yellow, right? But what this is basically saying is that this is the black value red to red, and that's 255 colors. If I type in 255, it'll bring me directly to red, right? Most of us know about this because this is a Photoshop thing or a digital art program thing, right? We red, green, and blue. That's how the values are adjusted. I'm going to Control Z that. So now what I've done is I've taken 4 colors and I've added it to this little system that I've made here. And what I've done is I've joined those 2 color schemes, 128 in the first, 128 in the second. So that'll be 256, right? So I have 256 values here. And then I did an expand. I technically don't need to do an expand. I could take that out. There's really no reason to have that. And then, well, actually, I guess I must have used that for something. I bet you I used that for my shift. Yeah, I did a ping pong here. That's the reason why I did that. And I changed the color. That's why. Okay, so in any case, I'm sorry. So this is the effect that you get from that. So I have a saw oscillator like I did before, and I'm shifting the colors and the texture data. How are we doing on time? We're about 30 minutes in. Okay, so that's good. Okay, so then I'm basically doing texture from data, and as you can see, there's this little line here. Let me make that so you can see that a little better. This is what it looks like, right? This is the gradient that I'm making within the system, and I'm basically changing the values. So basically what this does is the gradient, how it works with the colorize. If the value is black, the value that is black here, which would probably be over here on this end, right? As you can see, and if this was just a thin line, that color is changing multiple times. It's just that one singular color value, right? And so it's ramping up into these other colors. And the same thing with all the other colors of gray values in between and the white at the end. So it's just cycling through each of those colors. The system knows how to do that on its own because it's just basically changing values. It's substituting one value to another, very similar to a lookup table. And you'll probably see those a little bit more later on. Not lookup tables, but not lookup tables in this particular class. However, lookup tables have been added into Wire, and that's a game changer as well. Okay, before I start onto masks, does anybody have any questions? I thought I'd take this time to kind of answer any kind of questions you might have about how these gradients are working. Okay. No questions. Oh, you're good. No, this has been very detailed. Okay, cool. All right. So let's talk a little bit about masks. Masks, to me, this is one of those things that when I found out about how masks work, sure, I kind of understood how masks work. Okay. The biggest thing that you are told a great deal is, okay, this is a mask, big whoop-de-doo. Basically, anything that's black is transparent. Anything that's white is opaque. You can see it. I took a couple classes in college where we talked about how that works, that value. Okay, this is what's called rubylith. I don't know if any of you know what rubylith is, but basically, when they were making newsprints, they needed a way to show gradients of gray, right? So you can do black and white on a newspaper, but you notice there's this stippling, right? And the stippling looks kind of like this, right? And the reason being they're doing this is because they're trying to create shades of gray. And the shades of gray are created by making stippling. So how they were able to make this happen is they put this halftone pattern on the areas that were gray. And what would happen is on the parts of the rubylith that were being masked, like you're seeing here, this lady is in red. She's actually being masked with rubylith, and it's so that she seems brighter than everything else. Okay, here's a guy who's actually using rubylith to cut out those areas that you see in front of him. He would put a halftone screen, a screen that basically has a halftone pattern of a certain value. That halftone screen used to be so many dots per inch, or dot pixels per inch, which is DPI. And basically what would happen is you would get different gradations of gray based on how close or how big or how small those dot pixels or those little circles were. And what happens is it would change the gradation, and that's how you get newspapers. Newspapers were basically usually like 3 different values of halftone patterns put on top of each other, separated by this rubylith. And the rubylith was a way to separate the different colors out. So they would take a picture of something, they would burn it with the first image, or excuse me, they would rubylith the parts that they didn't want for the light gray, let's say, okay, which is the certain screen. They would put that on top. Then they would omit or take out more parts of a certain area and make it that darker, and then take out more parts and make that darker by adding in new halftone screens on top of it. And what happens is you end up with a newspaper kind of look where you'll see like little stipplings on their face to show gradations, very similar to this. And that is how Photoshop ends up with mask mode. That little icon that sits in the bottom of your Photoshop, I don't know if you ever noticed this, is red. Why is it that masking is red? It's a throwback to rubylith. Just a heads up. It's kind of a nifty little thing. I like that little technique because it changed my world. I knew how masking worked. This is usually the generic version of what we learn. We learned that here is a PNG file with a transparent background. Whoop-de-doo, Jake. There's not much to this. I'm just putting it in there because most of us kind of know how that works, right? So I'm taking over here, in this switch here, here's a test print. Right here is the texture in, okay? I'm taking that texture in and I'm bringing it into a switch, and I'll show you that switch a little bit later. But basically what's happening is this is just a generic test screen. Here's the test card, and I'm basically allowing it to mask in that area. Okay. This is the very basic of basics when it comes to masking. This is just an alpha channel. That's all it is. One's either black or it's white. It's either 1 or 0. When it's 1, you're going to be able to see it. When it's 0, you're not going to be able to see it. It's transparent. This checkerboard is indicative of almost every program that you'll ever know about Photoshop, right? Or any other kind of art program. That's to show that this is transparent. You can see through it. Now let's go on to the next one. The next one is a gradient. We're just going from black to white, right? But this is a luminance channel. This is where it gets interesting. Luminance channel, anything that is black will be transparent. Anything that is white on the right side will be opaque. You will not be able to see through it. Most of us understand how this works. However, the gradations of color in between will transition from transparent to opaque based on the 255 different colors of value. This is important because when I was shown that a luminance mask can be used for many different things, including photographs, in this case, bump maps, you can create some crazy things. Because you're taking the transparent values of... You're taking the transparent values of gray, and those are transparent, and the things that are white are going to be able to be seen. Okay? So let me just ponder this onto you, okay? We were just learning about gradients. Wasn't there a tool that we were using? What was that thing called? Oh, it was color something. I think it was this one, the colorizer. And we could plug it into here. No, we don't want to plug it into that one. We could plug it into the bottom one. We could make it red. That's kind of cool. No, let's take that a little further. Where's that shift again? Let's just make one. It's fine. We'll just, okay, linear. The linear is from black to white. We're going to change the color to black to white as a color value for the linear. We're going to put in the shift, right? And we're going to click the shift and we're going to drag the shift in. We're going to set this to what? 255 color. We're going to then take that 255 and set that to a texture from data, right? What do you guys think is going to happen when I plug this in? I'm going to switch this to palette. So we got this black and white, and I put this in here. What happens when I shift the shift? Does anybody know what happens? It's going to shift those values, right? So let me just move this. And here is the mask, right? So I'm going to plug this into here. And now look what happens when I move that value. I'm able to control where the values are because I'm taking the mask of the bump map and I'm changing the values. So now the white values are now the black and the black values are now the white, or I'm transitioning in, right, and transitioning out. Because this is a bump map, I can move my color wherever I so see fit. And the reason why this is important is because it allows me to control where I'm having my colors, where I'm having my values. The reason why this is important is because I could use something like this as a perfect example. This kind of goes into something that's very similar vein to what you just saw. Okay? I have this thing that I created in Blender that is an RGB like value of the different colors, right? So you got a little bit of blue here, a little bit of red, a little bit of green, and some yellow. So that'll be a little bit of yellow and blue make green kind of thing, right? So then what I've done here is I've taken that, I've merged it into a file just to make sure. I merged it because I wanted to make sure that it was the same size and aspect ratio of 1024 by 768, or 1920 by 1080, excuse me. And then what I did was I unpacked that into RGB values, okay? And I did that, and then what I did was I separated them into grayscale. So I just converted them to grayscale so that I could see them. That's the only reason why I did the grayscales. Technically, I don't need the grayscales, but I did it anyways. And then what I did was I also have a switch here, or a drop-down menu that allows me to choose between red, green, and blue. And then I have in the last values of your masks, you have the red, green, and blue channels that you can choose to make a mask. And the reason why this is important is because then what you could do is you could swap between those red, green, and blues to get different effects. And those are also luminance channels with red, green, and blue, right? Like we were talking about before, we were looking at the colors, right? And the luminance between these colors from black to red. Black is transparent and red is opaque, right? So if I'm using a red, green, and blue in, or blue, or yeah, in this case, I'm using red, right? Uh, you can see that there's a gradient value that's being used there. Now, that being said, like this is not really like you're not seeing like the green is probably the only place where there's like a transition from black to green. So if I made that the mask now, excuse me, you'll see that there's a little bit of a transparency happening right in here. But the reason why is because this is not really transparent. I could fix that, or I could add to that if I added a blur, because a pixel blur will add in. A pixel blur is basically blurring the lines, as you all know, but what I'm realizing to myself is as you blur things, you're also creating different values between them. It's not a sharp line. So then you'll get that transparency that you were looking for. And I think that is probably one of the most amazing things that I've kind of had an epiphany about. The old things become new and the new things become old. Um, it is amazing to me how much I learn by just fiddling with these nodes over and over and over. And that was one of the things that I've learned just recently. Again, for the millionth time. So to kind of give this, just kind of hone this in, I have this mask here, right? And what I can do is push the button, Jake, push the button. So now I'm taking the gradient that I was using in the first one, and I'm adding that over the top of this torus to give it this look. This is to give you an example of some of the things that you could do with gradients. So if I had red, green, or blue, you could transition them out, right? And the thing that is probably the most interesting to me about this is if this was animated, which you could do. It doesn't have to be just an image. That's what I used here, but technically you could use something that's animated in red, green, and blue, and then transition between the red, green, and blue masks and do some wild stuff. Whatever you can think of is dream up as the world is your oyster, right? So here's an example of a picture of some graphics that I was creating. I was interested in abstract at the time, and I've done all these like templates or plates, as I was calling them. And I did all kinds of crazy things with them in Photoshop. And now I'm reusing those very things to create new things. So here is my linear this is my gradient that I've created that has a shift, right? It's not moving, but I've added it to this colorize. And the reason why is because what I've done is I've taken this background and added it to a mask, which is created by that black and white that we were using before. And that black and white has a little bit of a levels. Oh, sorry, guys. Has this little bits of levels that looks like water. And so what I did was I made that my mask, and I overlaid that on top of the blue, and I created this unique look. So this is to give you an idea of some of the things that you could do. It's just figuring out how to put them together. And that's where I spend most of my time, is figuring out how to put these things together. So that is how masking works. That's a small version of masking. There is some serious power there. A lot of this has to do with omitting and bringing back values. Before, some of the other tutorials that I've done, I've used this masking techniques to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And I will continue to use it because it allows many different things to change. Any questions so far? You need to put this color control on your main. You know I can make that happen. Zulu, get in contact with me later. I'll make that happen. um, so that is the first part. This is the first part of the system. I love how many of the ideas I'm getting in all from all this. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you're getting a value from this. So now I'm going to transition to the other page, or I'm going to transition to the other file real quick. If you guys have any questions, this would be a perfect time. We're going to transition in. I'm going to say don't save because we didn't really change too much. Well, and the good news is that this has been taped. So if you it's been recorded. So in a couple days you'll have it as a reference as well to go back through. And that's awesome. Okay, so curves is an interesting thing. Curves is a lot of different things. So I find it's very important to kind of know about curves because I think this kind of goes with the gradients. The gradients can be used in many different ways, right? And actually, somebody's typing. Let me ask if somebody has any questions. I want to make sure. The day rate doesn't change. Might as well get something more useful out of it. Awesome. Okay. So curves. We have this linear curve or linear gradient that we've been talking about, right? But when we add in curves, what we're doing is we're getting a different kind of look. So here, I'm going to scroll in just a little bit. This is the curves node. The curves node basically allows me to change the values of gradients and push them one side or the other. Okay. The reason why box truck bigger than the place I'm in. That's awesome. Yeah. You know what? More on that later. Okay. Focus, Jake. Focus. Okay. So you have a curve, okay, and the curve will basically change your values. It'll push the values to one side or push your values to the left side. So now your white values, it's a way to kind of ramp up the white. So it could be dark, 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 and way up to white, right? And so your values can change. And to give you an example, here's a quadratic out. You'll notice that the darker values got bigger. Okay. If I do a quadratic out, it'll do the reverse, right? If I do in out, it'll do both sides. It'll do like more in the middle. Okay. All of these values, I'm not going to go through all these values, but I'm going to go through some of them. When you mess with these values, what will happen is it will change the way in which the gradient is being touched. So for instance, right now I have more on the dark side, but then there's this small piece of white on the right side, and the values change based on what I've told it. And so my curves are set from 0 to 1 as the minimum maximum. So if I change my white value to 4 as my maximum, you'll notice that the starting value pushes it to the left on my end. So if I decide that I want to make that really, like I could add, instead of 0, I could do 0.5, or I could do, so it'll stretch it out, right? If I do negative 0.5, it'll bring the values closer to the right. And so the reason why this is important is because it allows me to adjust where my gradient is. But it's not just for gradients. Curves can be used in many different ways. So let's go to this example. In this example, I've actually got an expand of 80. So I've got 4 different sets of gradients that are end to end. And what I've done is I've put a curve in the middle that is on elastic out, and it creates these bands where it's like gray to black, but it creates this bouncing effect. And the reason why is because there's that elastic in and out. It's a value change. And it's important to kind of add this in because this could this could really change the way in which your effects look. So now, like if I were to put in that shifting oscillator like we had before, right? Shift, and I add that into here, and I click this into here, and then I set a saw oscillator, and I change my amplitude to 80, and it's set for 255. That might be a little fast. Yeah, it's fast. So let's change this value to, let's go the opposite direction. How do we change it to the opposite direction? Does anybody know? We put in negative 0.015, and now it's going the opposite direction. That's a little too slow. Let's actually bring that up. 1.5. So now we have this value, negative. That's correct. So negative is the opposite direction. So now we're going to do a gradient. Here's the gradient. And we're going to make this white and black. Well, actually, yeah, let's make it white and black. White and black. And then we're going to put in a colorize. And then the colorize is changing that. And we got to change this to... Oh, wait, wrong thing. Wrong thing. Just a moment. The gradient goes to this one because I'm changing that gradient. I'm going to make that radial. And then I'm going to change this to palette. About to do a plaid VJ set, by the way. There you go. There's your plaid. Well, maybe not your plaid, but you get the idea. So this basically is because my curves have changed, right? So if I change this curves back to linear, I change this value to 0, this value to 1. Here's that normal gradient, right? But then if I go scene in or scene out, scene in, there. So now I have more black than white. So it allows me to change my values. The curve value is a way to change that ramp. So there's certain instances where that could be super helpful because you want to be able to change the values. Another example is I could take this 20 and I could plug the 20 in there, right? So now I'm just getting what I normally get, which is 20 values, 80 values of 20, which is 4 values of gradients that it's going through. If I set that curve in between and I change my value instead of from 0 to 1, I change this to 80. Now I'm setting a scene in to out based on that curve. So basically what I'm saying is I'm going through all 80 values. If I set this to, let's say, scene out, will that be easier to see? Linear. There are 80 values. What am I doing wrong? It's still changing the values because it's seeing these as it has to do with because it's this, right? So actually my curve needs to come at the end, most likely. That's the reason why. So what I need to do is I actually need to change this back to 0 and 1. And then I need to put this curve here to change the palette. Sometimes you have to think about how you're doing things, about what comes first, the order of operations. You'll notice that now it's kind of changing, but it should be changing the values from white to black, and it's not changing the values from white to black. So one of the ways that you could do that is add in a value. One way you could do that. Okay, so let's talk about this for just 1 second. This would actually be sick for a punk show. Very cool. Okay, so if I have this linear, okay, and it's doing these values, I can add in, just make an add value, okay, and then I'm going to put it there. And what I'm going to do is instead of, I already have a value of 20 to expand to 80, but what I want to do is I actually want to make a value of 80 and add them to the existing values. And so now I'm going from black to white. This is what I was trying to show you. So what this does is you're basically creating you're adding the values together. So there are not 180 values, you're adding the values together. So basically, I'm taking the first 80 and adding them to the second 80, which is ramping that gradient. And the reason why this is important is because now I can use that curves. So here's my curves. I'm going to take that out. All right, I had to kind of think about this. I was trying to do this for class, and I was like, I'll do this later. And then later never came. Okay, so if I put this here and I put this here, now I have this curves, and it's a saw in. So now I should get... And now it's not working. Okay, what am I not doing? 40, 40, shift. No, I'm doing it. It's doing it. Okay, so now if I do this... Yeah, okay. So now it's changing those gradient values based on the ramp. So I could do something like a bounce in, bounce out. And so now I'm getting that bounce. You'll notice that this one's really, really dark, and then there's a strong white value, but then there's this lighter value banding, and an even lighter banding, and then an even lighter banding. So I'm getting that bounce across, right? So now the colorize is much different than what it was before. So it's a way of controlling where things are happening. You just have to just kind of fiddle with it. The thing with curves within Wire is that it's not as user intuitive as you'd like it to be sometimes. Mainly because you'll be doing something like a 0 and 1 value, but then you realize that, like, for instance, in this case, it's not a 0 and 1 value, it's actually a 0 and 80 value, right? Or, oh, hey, that still applies to a 0 and 1 value, and that's what you want. So sometimes it's kind of counterintuitive to what you think about. So it's fiddling with it and then trying to figure out, okay, is that right? No, that doesn't work. In most programs, you will have a curve kind of set, and it's used typically in animation. So, for instance, here's an example, left to right, right? An easy transition from left to right. And then here's an example if I go bounce out. So now I get this bounce kind of option. This is what it typically is shown as, what that transition does. And that's done through the curve node, right? So I could do a bounce in and out, and you're going to get this kind of weird kind of at the very beginning. It still kind of bounces at the end, but you'll notice that the bounce is kind of interesting on the left side. You'll see it bounce, but it won't be as... It's because it's going so fast. If I smooth it for a little bit more, 0.75, it might be a little bit more seeable. You could see it like blip there. I could probably change it to 1 and it would probably be... So that's kind of to give you an idea as to what that does. Okay. Here, what I've done is I've actually used a float 2 to make the transition. Okay. So I have a circle. The circle has a float 2 on it. A float 2 is for X and Y values. The X is for left and right. The Y is for up and down. I have to think about that because I'm like every time. Anyways. The X value is negative is to the left and positive is to the right. The 0.5 value is in the middle. Okay. And so what I'm doing here is I'm using a smooth to make that ease of transition so it doesn't happen quickly. It's just a slow transition, right? So when I push the button on, it's at -1, and when I push the button off, it's at +1. And it eases through that, right? And the bounce is coming from the curve. Excuse me. And I put it right between the smooth and the curve so that the curve will make that transition. So the smooth happens first, so it makes that easy transition between the two values, but then the curve is what makes it bounce, right? So that's how you have to have that set up. So if I do 2, so now when I push that button, it'll be slower. From my 20s, annihilated most of my brain cells. Okay, so that is the reason why curves is important, is because if you understand and master the curves, there's some crazy things that you could do with that, right? You could use the curves as a way to change the gradients. This is an example of that. There are 2 different curves that are happening here, and you have 2 different effects. And the reason why I have two different effects is because I'm using a sine oscillator in this one to change my gradient from this back in and out to go to make that transition. You'll notice the transition's different here from here. There is no transition here in this one. It doesn't, the values don't go together, condensed and reversed and keep doing this, right? Instead, they're just straight values. And I do this because my gradient balls look like this. The gradient balls have a fuzziness to them, which in translation is a gradient, right? The fuzziness is the gradient. And so now I can make these kinds of options. The other thing that's kind of cool about this is, like we were talking about before, if I'd use a step, right? If I take that step and I just plug that step in, you'll notice that you get this kind of effect, right? Just a heads up, when you use a float within a color ramp, when you use it, it's going to give you a float 4, right? So one of the things you're going to want to do is go float 4, and then plug the float 4 into that space, and then just use because my color values I don't usually change those RGB values. I want them to change all at the same time. I'll just add in a float in or a float 1 in this case, or just a float. It's not a float 1, it's just a float. And then I'll just plug it into the X, Y, and Z coordinates. And when you do that, now I have this ramp that allows me to go from the blacks to the whites. So that's how that is able, that's one of the other nifty things that you can play with as far as gradients. You could use a step to kind of make that transition between the two. The other way is you have step, which works with color. You also have threshold. Threshold is another way that you could do that same kind of thing. When you do threshold, however, it's just black and white, and you're transitioning between those two values, the greater than, less than values. You can add some smoothness to it, which is nice, so that you could take some of that smoothness away. So it's not like this, but it's more like just a transition of smaller amounts of values of gray. It's not the entire amount of grays in between. So that's an easy way to kind of give this look. Okay, so now let's go down here and talk about some things of why you would use a threshold. This is the final huzzah of the tutorials within the files, and then we can talk about some other things, if you guys still have time. So basically what I'm using is I have a hexagon shape here, and what I'm doing is I'm actually adding a linear with 10 values, and then what I'm doing is I'm changing the values to go from 0 to negative 0.16. So basically I'm going from the 0 value smaller, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm putting it into a float 2, which allows me to make that transition. This was because I had a moon here, and technically I don't need this one anymore, but I'm going to leave it in for this case. The one that is probably more valuable here is the scale. Sorry about the cat. You have this linear again here at the bottom. This linear has 10 values yet again, going from 1 to 0 instead of 0 to 1. On a float 2, again, the same kind of thing I did before. Here's a float 2 where it's just basically connected together again, because the values are not different. They're an aspect ratio kind of thing, okay? And then those float 2s are connected to a curve. That curve is set to my quadratic in and out, and the reason being is because I'm going to move those into a scale, which you can't see here, okay? However, I also changed those color values of those 10 hexagons is what I've got. And what I've done is I've changed those 10 colors from black to blue. And what happens is I get this. The quadratic is to change the values of the curves, so to make these look like the closer they are, the more distance they have together. And as they get further down in, the hexagons are tighter and tighter and tighter. And the reason why is because I want to create that optical illusion of it going down in. And this, mind, is how I was able to create that curve that curve craziness thing, is I was using this kind of technique to make this work. The problem with this is that I actually have to use a mask in order to make this work with something that is not a shape. And the reason why that's the problem is because there's things like edges that are harder to come by when it comes to like objects, like shapes, or not shapes, like masks. You can make a mask or you can make an edge with a mask by using edge detection, but it's not perfect. There's some finessing there. So basically what I did was same kind of thing. Here's a linear with an edge, and then I transformed that edge. And then what I did was I changed the color of those values. So now it's going from white to black. So the ones that are at the bottom, or the ones that are in the middle, are black. And then what I could do here, you'll notice that now this one's a little bit better, right? So white to black. And then when I put them together, this is what I get. That look like you're going down into a tunnel. And that kind of wraps up this tutorial, particularly because we've talked about the gradients. Adding them in causes the gradients on the edges. The curves shows you how it brings it in. And then the mask, how could I use the mask? Well, there's a couple ways. If I change this to actually like white, I could technically use this as a mask if I wanted to, right? And I could, like, I don't know, put this on the mask here and take this from here. There. Just to kind of wrap it up in a bow. Instead of that, we could use this curve. There. And to give you an example, this is the kind of stuff that I'm doing. Like, I'm creating all kinds of crazy stuff as much as I can learn. The Book of Shaders, if any of you guys are interested in learning more about how GLSL works, that's a great, great book, or a great resource online. You can find it, called The Book of Shaders. It's a very great set to understand. Also, I will give you the link, Zulu. There's a couple of them. There's Pixel Composer. That's a $20 program that works very similar to Wire. It's in some cases it's got a lot more features, and it's an amazing program. But it is meant for pixels. It's meant for like video game kind of footage stuff, and it doesn't blend into Resolume. So there are some things there, and I'm over here trying to figure out how my M2 Max GPU pinned. So there's also a couple other things, like I use, so the thing that this kind of came from, this hexagon, I wanted to kind of give you an example. Where's that echo thing? Echo test 3, it's the echo. Gradient echo is what I called it. I'm probably going to have to pull it up because, yeah, let's just do that. Gradient echo. Okay, so we're going to save this. Okay, so this was that original design. So yeah, this is the kind of thing. Pixel Composer, yep, that's perfect, Alice. That's exactly it. So Pixel Composer, Book of Shaders, Acerola, Blender. There's another program called Tool 3, Tooll 3. That is a free program that's very similar to Touch Designer. There's a bit of a learning curve, but I'm telling you, it is an amazing program. Also, Cables.gl is a great program. Black Ink. Black Ink is more of an art program, but there's some really great little things with that. You can tie that. I tied that in with all of my projection mapping because it allows me to control masking like nobody's business. I just found out about Tool 3, but I'm lost. That's very easy to do because Tool 3 is more than just wire patches. It's like it's actual programming. A lot of it is very, very interesting stuff. A lot of my patches start off as these simple concepts and then they end up looking like this in the end. And the reason being is because I'm trying to figure out ways to add in like ideas. And so, like, for instance, here's an example of Mind One. He was having a conversation. He doesn't know I did this. I took his chat because he asked me questions about what could I add into this. And so what I ended up doing was putting it in here because to remind myself of what he wanted to see. And so, like, again, you keep telling me, man, I'm gonna be sorry. I know you, but I'm telling you right now, I'm hungry for this stuff. This is what I do. Don't threaten me with a good time. So, but there's all kinds of crazy stuff. So I also have, for you guys who are interested, I also am working on a patch that's coming out very, very soon. It should be out next week. Sometime, I'm hoping by Monday, Wednesday at the very latest. I hope that's not the case, but that's this one. It's Heartlines is what it's called. Heartlines is an audio reactive generative like pattern. So, like for instance, right now you can't really see it because it's green, or it's the background is transparent. But you can do some really crazy, wild stuff with this, and it's meant for Resolume Wire. As a matter of fact, I could probably just open it up. That'd probably be better. Let's just do that. Don't save. So if I open up Resolume Arena, I'm killing my computer, but hopefully you guys still see me. This is Heartlines. So the cool thing about Heartlines is it's audio reactive, so you can set it to your music, and it's got all kinds of crazy stuff you can play with. All your resource are belong to me. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So this one you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. You can. It's also featured on Mind One's stream if you guys would like to see all the crazy wonderfulness that he's made with it. It is amazing. It is a really great little tool. You can do all kinds of overlays. These are just some of the presets that are set up already. I like this one. This was one of my favorite ones. And it's these are so actually some of this is from that technique that we've been talking about tonight, which is that gradients, right? This is nothing more than a gradient. This is fractal noise that's been blurred. Actually, I don't even think it's been blurred. There has been other techniques that have been added to it, but basically, yes, it's exactly it. Our resources, that's it, exactly it. Um, and basically, what I'm doing is I'm using different techniques, different gradients. It's the same thing as like halftone motion. This is nothing more than gradients happening behind the scenes. There's an option called there's a node called meta, and meta allows you to create these square like patterns, but you can do like it's not just squares, it's circles, hexagons, crosses, all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's created through this pattern that I've made, right? So if I turn down my pattern cycle and then I can zoom out, I don't know if you can see that, but that's just basically a fractal pattern. Jacob even has time to match a glitch patch for his cam, guys. God. That was on purpose. This is one of the newer ones that I've been working on. I like the idea of Traffic Slide, which was another patch that I'd created. I'm working on this very circular kind of look. This is actually created with a delay. That was the craziness behind it. Um, so yeah, that's been fun trying to put that one together. I can't wait for this one to come out. So a friend of mine wanted me to take that gradient echo and make it. So this is what it looks like when you add in your own beat in your music. It can randomly transform into a different object, right? Um, and I'm still debating whether or not I want to make this one a patch because it's a circle. I like the idea. I think it's a really great patch. But I'm just wondering how useful this is. Like, Mind was able to come up with some crazy stuff with this, so maybe I should just put it out and just see what happens. But I had a friend of mine who wanted one for his he does twinkle lights. He does Christmas lights, and so he needed one that was in the heart, a shape of a heart that beats to the music. That's going to be playing to "You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch," and so this is the heart. So I was able to just take a shape and just add it in. So it's not just that. It's not just for It's not just for a random shape. It's other things. But then I also have done this touring pattern is the newest thing. It's becoming very, very popular. I think it's because it's free. But it's basically this is an interesting one. This is again all this is just basically blurring and gradients is what creates this. It's actually a little bit more, but the premise behind it. I can show you the premise if you'd like to see it, but basically it creates that object behind the scenes. And so I actually have a different version of it that does some other things. Um, but same kind of thing. Um, this is the touring. This is just the basic version, and then I also have the version that I put together that I'm still debating whether or not I should put it out as a patch. The problem with putting this one out as a patch is that touring may be something that is copyrighted, and so I just don't want to take the chance on that. Reaction diffusion. Yep. Same. Yep. Reaction diffusion. So yeah, I create all kinds of crazy stuff. If you guys are looking for ways of things to happen, let me know. This was another thing that I was putting together. This is another one of my patches out on Juicebar. This is Ember Mask. It makes things look like fire, and you can change the color of the fire. So yeah, it's fun. My PM went to yell at me until I watched 5 minutes of this with me. So yeah, so I create all kinds of crazy stuff. I also have this like little banner box that I made. This was just kind of something funny that I'd put together because I could do it in Wire. It expands and it's just a banner box that allows you to slide it anywhere you want it, and then you can put your text on top, right? Or the vice versa, you could move your text to it. So that's where I had it. We're doing vertical, like that, and you could change the color, outline. You could. So it was something that I felt that was necessary. Tonight, babe, Jacob's doing a wire tutorial. Holy cow, that's funny. So yeah, that is how that works. Yeah. So if you guys have any questions about patches or wire stuff, or you want to see something that I've been working on, let me know. This is line distortion. It creates a line distortion, randomly generates the different looks of your file. I'm dying over here. That was hilarious and true. Hey guys, I'm humbled. I am very happy that you guys think that. And then, yeah, so this is just fiddle time. So if you guys have any questions about some of the other patches and other things that I do, let me know. Put it in the comments. I'll show you anything you want to see. So one of the things you guys might know about is the colorize within Arena or within Avenue and Arena is different than the colorize they have with Wire. It's something that I noticed, and I was like, "Hey guys, can you add this? Because I'd like this to be a feature." And they're like, "Yeah, that's something nobody really knows about. We're surprised that you picked that up." So if you go into your palettes and you click this little button here, you have all these different palette options, right? So if I change this to palette, now it makes a color gradient, which is similar to colorize within Wire, but it does something different. It's the way in which the values are treated are different here. So just a heads up if you ever wanted to know. +1, if you need something, ask Jacob. He's super dope and to work with, and patches are top notch. Hey man, thanks very much. I do appreciate that. I try my hardest. I will make an attempt at anything you guys give to me. And the reason why I wanted this to be the palette picker, there was a reason for that, and I was trying to remember what specifically, but there is this palette option that they give you here in Colorize is different than the Colorize they give you in Wire. And I forget what it is specifically. It's similar, but there's just like, I think it had something to do with how it treats the contrast. Could you feed the RGBA values from the palette into Wire as an input? RGBA values. Technically, yes, you could, as long as you knew what the color values were. So, if you could get the colors from an MIDI controller, or you could get them from the OS. Is it OSC? Is that what it is? I forget. I feel like I'm getting that wrong. Is it OSC? OSC. I'm feeling like that's not. It is OSC. Okay. So you could take those values from an OSC or from a MIDI controller, like a value. MIDI controller might be a little bit more challenging, only because there's only 128 values there per MIDI punch, right? Per piano push. I'm gonna save and quit this. Let me go back into Wire real quick. Maybe I could shut down some programs and let my computer come back to reality. You guys probably really liked the glitch version better. At least made this face look so much better. Okay, so if you do HSB, right? HSB, here is your hue, saturation, and brightness values. So technically, there are 128 values there between each float, and you could get any color that you wanted to. So if you did let's just use a gray. So if I go solid, so there's a couple ways you could do this, but basically if I have a solid color like this and I turn this into gray, right? The reason why I'm using 50% gray is because I can change this to any value, where if you use white, it's going to give you only certain colors, and if you use black, vice versa. So use gray and the main value. Again, there are many ways that you could do that, right? You could just change your values here, right? You could do a float 4, right? And then plug that into here. And so now if I change these values, I'll get every color of the rainbow. And actually, it's not zero. It's not 255, and this particular value, I think it's just 0 to 1. So you would do 0.15, yeah, and then 0.15, and then we'll do 0.45. And so now, whenever I change these values, instead of X, Y, Z, this is actually red, green, and blue. And so technically, you could change those values here. You also have the option for HSB, same kind of thing. The difference with this is this plugs into something else, if I'm not mistaken. To data, I think. It would help if I learn how to spell. And I think that's what you do is you plug it in. Yeah, there. So Now I get this to here, and then I change this to absolute, right? And so now I'm doing 1920 by 1080, or I could do relative, which would give me a 1-to-1 value. So whatever the value is, it'll automatically do it. If I've made a patch, could I send it to you and to ask for help with it? Yes. Yes, you could. Yes, please. If I've done something like this, send OSC values to color than the visuals from chat. So basically what this could do is you could then feed those numbers so it really just depends on how the numbers come in. But technically, yes, you could take a MIDI control, because there's all kinds of MIDI values here. I have to brush up on my MIDI controller values to remember how that works. But basically, you get it to read a number value from 1 to 127. If you're doing 1 to 127, you would probably have to divide that to make it into a 0 to 1 value, would be the only thing. Or you could do a map. So the map controls, or map node, is a really kind of cool thing, because you can tell it my value is from 0 to 1, but the value that I'm going to receive is from 1 to 127. So I could go 1 to 127, and it will map it to the 0 is 1, and the max 127 is 1. So then it's using those values instead of the it's using the 0 to 1 value instead of the 127 value. So then I could plug this in and then just have a map for each one. And each one plugs into the X, Y, and Z. And then you would have your MIDI coming into to here. And we actually do have, I don't know if Zulu's still on, but I know that one of our guys was playing around with the MIDI controllers, and he's had some serious time to play around with the MIDI controls. And I think he figured out ways to do all kinds of crazy stuff with his MIDI controllers. So if you can make it into a MIDI value or an OSC value, you could bring it into Wire, and yes, it is possible to change the colors. I could probably do it. I would just need a little bit of time to kind of figure that through. But yes, I think it's possible. So I have an API call that converts hex to HSB and sends that patch through OSC. Yes. So yes, that would be what we would do here in this particular case. So chat can type hex value, or it converts it and applies it. Correct. And you would have basically kind of like a lookup table or a text file, or not a text file, a font, right? You could do it through a font. You could create your own special unique font in Adobe, or I know CorelDRAW gives you an ability to create a font, and you could technically do it that way. It would be kind of hokey, but it would work. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that you could do. It's just figuring out what's the best way to make it happen, and then what's the cheapest value, or not cheapest value, what do they call that? Like lowest overhead for your computer, so that it's not cooking your PC while you're trying to do that on top of the 20 million things that Mind does with his computer. And I'm pretty sure your computer is...
Yeah, I've done a lot of crazy stuff with MIDI and OSC, but I feel like there's some other tools that might be better. Like Mind One actually probably has some more knowledge of how this might work kind of over a network.
And I know that there are like controls within Wire, but there's also controls within Resolume too.
I feel like OSC is probably the way.
Yes.
But I'm not familiar with like the tools of like how to connect kind of like the throughput to get that OSC from one end to the other over like the web.
So it's whatever programmer you're using to get. Yes.
Yeah, like LAN is no problem at all, but yeah, like over the internet, I just wouldn't know how to do it.
I think if I remember correctly, he's using like the streamer bot will basically bring it into his computer. So then he's basically taking it from whatever bits of code in his computer, and then he can push it to OSC, if I'm not mistaken, right? And so then the OSC would just be basically just a listener on the other end in Wire or Resolume, whichever it is. And it would be basically listening for those components, and it's basically garbage in, garbage out. It'll basically listen for those numbers, and if it sees a specific number, the input, it'll say, if number equals such and such, then change this value.
If it's a
Sorry, go
custom
ahead.
bot, I mean, you could program it to like actually have commands, right? That you could trigger like specific like even clips and stuff like that.
Correct. He's got all kinds of crazy stuff. Also, are you using TouchOSC, Mind? Okay, that's what I kind of figured. I wasn't sure. I saw you messing around with something the other night, and I was like, I bet you he's using OSC. That's a great little program, too. I used that to control some stuff in Blender, and it was pretty amazing. Like, you can control lighting. So one of the things that I was working on was a way to control lighting within Resolume. But when I started messing around with it, I was like, well, the only thing is Blender would be really great if I could just do it in Blender and then have it like use the OSC control within Blender, and there is a way to do that. There's actually an add-on that you can put into Resolume or into Blender. The whole visual setup is controlled by chat. That's awesome. So, like for instance, if I do Resolume here, and I just need to find a normal map. So I did this shape. Okay, we'll just use this donut here. Yeah, we'll use this donut. Okay, so I have this shape here, right? It's just a normal map that I rendered in Blender. And what you can do is I created this thing called map normal lighting. Somewhere in here. Just got to figure out where I put it. Mapped normal lighting. And this was the quick and dirty way of doing mapping. Right, so then so there's the lighting, and then you put in the masked version, or no, the non-masked version. So put this in like this, and then you have the mapping for lighting, and it'll do the lighting. So I was working on ways to control lighting within Resolume. And I think I've done a different version of this. But in any case, this was the first set of thoughts about controlling lighting within Blender or within Resolume to give it that extra sense of depth. And I have better examples of this. So I am blanking on how I was even able to. I think I had a different map. But basically, yeah. Free space heater. Ain't that the truth? And then what you can do is then. So I have this lighting here, and then the other thing that I was thinking was you could also then use a bump map to control the X, Y, and Z values. So then you have the X, Y values in this more normal map. So you have the X, Y, and map normal lighting, and then the Z, which is the in and out, can be controlled by a bump map. Oh, actually, I think I can create something like that. Let me clear this, clear. And then I have that here. I can put this one in, and this one in. Then set, actually move this one up, this one here, and this one here. Then this one is already set. But did I have that Z direction? That was the other thing. I think I had a UV lighting, was it? Light size, light fall off, bottom right, bottom right. Okay. So then if I have this set up right, let me just make sure. Yeah. So left, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Magic Music Visualizer is pretty interesting too. I've been actually looking at getting that because there are things that it can do that it gives Wire a run for its money. Like it does better. Map normal lighting. Like that. So then what I can do is then change this to yellow and then change the size, light opacity, change the size. There we go. This one's called Map Normal Lighting. And then lately I added this other tool, this UV mapping, this UV lighting. And so what this does is it takes your bump map and makes it you use it as a mask, right? So you use it as the masked layer. So if you right click on a layer and you go mask mode and you say one below, it basically creates the map normal lighting as its mask. It uses this mask for the mask normal lighting. And so then you can control your X, Y, and Z by two different patches. One patch is your map normal lighting, which is your X, Y, and then the second one is your UV. So, or your in and out. And this was actually in one of our tutorials that we were talking about at one time. I think we did this for another patch or for another tutorial series. I love mapping. I use Heavy M for my mapping because it allows me to control so much more. You can do those things in Wire, and it's great because it incorporates into Wire, but I really like how Heavy M is set up as far as the projection mapping part goes. So it really just depends on the situation. If I wanted to spout in Wire, does that patch become an effect instead of a source, or is that even possible? Okay, so the differences between sources and effects. Sources are brought in through the source button, and effects are through the effects button, as you obviously know. But it's basically just a button. And the difference is that a source only requires a texture out, where an effect requires a texture in and a texture out. And how you would set that is within your patch. When you go to your patch settings, you'll notice over here on the right-hand side, it says category, source. You have source, effect, and mixer. Mixer is for between the A/B effect. They're an interesting thing, but nobody... The thing is with the A/B mixers, I have yet to see a VJ user, use a mixer. I actually have a mixer out there. If you're interested, it's the A to B mixer that does the what is it called? Melt and Mosh. I did an A/B Melt and Mosh mixer, and it was great, but it doesn't it's probably one of my least selling patches. People like it. It's a great idea, but nobody ever transitions to A and B. Very few people, I should say, do that. Well, guys, I hate to stop it here. However, I need to get up early tomorrow morning. I have work in the morning. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of your guys' time. Thank you very much for showing up, for giving me this opportunity to teach you a little bit about Wire. If there's anything I can do for you, please give me a holler. You can reach me through all of my social medias, Jacob Mesick. You can reach me through my email address, jacobmesick@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, please send them to my email. I want to know. I want to know very well, very much. I appreciate you guys' time. Check out my Juicebar plugins, please, and that new one should be dropping very, very soon. Monday, Wednesday at the latest. So thank you very much again for your time. I appreciate all of you guys, and you guys have a great night.